Hi friends, my name is Jake. Welcome to Canadian Cutting Edge University. This is one of my education videos where I talk about something. You're going to learn how to close a locked folding knife. This is the very basics. It's specially made for people that are new to knives. Perhaps a spouse or a friend gave you a knife and it's a folding knife and they showed you how to use it. You put it away and then a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months later, you pulled it out, you opened it up, and oops, how do I close this thing? Don't be embarrassed. Don't feel stupid. That's just how it works. My father was the guy who got me into knives. But when he grew up, all he had was slip joint knives and lockback knives. And a couple of years ago, I gave him a nice new knife, and I showed him how to use it. And he just didn't get it. He couldn't figure out how to close the knife. A couple days later, I talked to him again, and he's still having trouble with it. It's just the way it goes. Some things just sink into our brains quicker than others. Don't be embarrassed. So if you're new to knives, keep watching. I let YouTube do one commercial break, and then the rest of it will all be good, solid information. Let's get over to the tabletop and learn something. The first thing that we need to learn is safety. If we open a knife, what we need to do when we want to close it is always be very careful that our finger's not going to get cut when we close the knife. So looking at the blade, sharp part is here, dull part is here. So the sharp side, you go along to the handle and you take a look. That's along the same plane as the sharp side. That's the zone to stay away from. I know for some of you it might sound like I'm talking down to you, but I want to cover all the bases for absolutely everybody who watches this. So that's the danger zone. You stay away from there. So when you're holding the knife, hold it like this. Don't put your fingers across it until you're ready. I'm talking about when you're wanting to close the knife. Keep your hands out of the way. Of course, when you're using the knife, your hand has to go over that area, and that's just fine. But when you're thinking about closing the knife, keep your hands totally away from there. So you might have to learn how to hold the knife safely when you're trying to close it. The first kind of knife that I'm going to talk about is this style. This is a liner lock knife. And it gets that name from these middle sections here. They're called the liners. So we've got the handle material, very often G10 on a lot of knives. On this knife, we've got brown handle material, and the liners are hidden inside. You can't see them. So you can't always see the liners. Let's see, do I have another knife? Here's another knife. And on here, the liners are steel. And then you see this dark part, the blue and black part. Those are the handle scales. So the liners are the steel on the inside, handle scales. On a liner lock, the liner is part of the locking mechanism. So keeping yourself safe, you take a look at the knife, take a look at the cutting edge, and you want to look on the side of the knife or the edge of the knife handle that is with the cutting edge. Cutting edge here, so I want to look on this side. So I'm looking at it, and if I see that there is metal coming back and it coming across towards the joint between the blade and the handle, called the pivot point. So if there's steel coming over towards the tang of the blade, which means the base part of the blade, coming over and meeting those two spots, that's a liner lock. And to disengage it, you need to push it over to this side here. Let me see if I got a pen that I can point with. That's not a good one. I'll use this to point with. So there's going to be, if you see the liner here, there's a space between this G10 and the liner that's open now. What you need to do is push that steel back over. And of course, you don't use something like this. It actually is safest to use your hand. That way things don't slip. On this knife, if you're looking at this side, you can't look down and see anything. It's all even. But on this side, there's a bigger opening right here where your index finger goes when you're holding the knife. So you'll look at that spot where your index finger goes, and you can see that liner. Sometimes it's got milled sections, or you got these lines right here. Sometimes you can't see much there at all, but there's going to be something exposed there that you can push over. And once you've pushed it over, you then take this finger, your index finger. So I like to hold it like this. Put my thumb in there, push it over, and then with this finger, I lift up. So if I do it sideways, hopefully this will stay. I push that over, and then I push up with that. And once I've got it just a little ways up, when you're learning, what is safe to do now is let go with this hand completely, and now take a look at the knife. The blade is partway closed, and now you can see that this liner arm is all the way that way. And all you have to do is keep your fingers out of the way and keep pushing it closed. And it's all the way closed. Of course, to open it, you open it up again. And then you push across, start to lift, make sure your thumb's out of the way, continue to lift the blade closed. Liner locks are one of the knives that is easiest to cut yourself when you're first learning. But since they're the most popular kind of knife these days, I'm showing it first. Push the blade over, close it up. If you've got any other questions, leave them in the comments below, and check the timestamp on the video and tell me at what time it was that you saw something that you're asking about. That will really help me to give you good answers. One of the closest relatives of the liner lock is the frame lock. This is a frame lock knife. It's the same model knife, except it doesn't have G10 on the outside. It's just all steel. It's actually like a liner lock, but without the G10, without the handle material. Now, what is the liners is a little thicker on a frame lock, generally speaking. Other than that, as you can see here, it's exactly the same knife. Opening up the blade, they look the same, and they operate the same way. You let's move this out of the way. You take your thumb and you push that out of the way, but since it's part of the frame, it's not the liner anymore, now it's the frame. You push the frame out of the way, begin to close it, get your thumb out of the way, continue closing it, and stay safe while you're doing it. And you'll get used to that in short order on pushing that out of the way. Some knives, you can push that too far, and if you push it too far, you can break the knife. A lot of knives have built-in protection, so you can't push it too far. This knife is a budget knife. You can get these in the 20s, 20 US dollars, 24, 25 US dollars for this knife. And so, yeah, push it out of the way, close it up. So frame lock, liner lock work the same way to close the blade. The most common knife out there these days is the lockback knife, also called the backlock knife. So I've got one right here. And we'll open this up, and there you go. The blade's open. The way you figure out how to close this one is, here's the cutting edge, here's the spine. Follow the spine onto the handle, and if you see a little cutout zone like this, it can be right at the very back, and it can be anywhere up to about the middle. It's generally not closer than the middle. And that acts like a bit of a button to unlock the knife. All knives lock in this area right here at the pivot. And so this kind has got a pivot point. There's this bar that goes through here. It's got a pivot point right there. You push it in, and it lifts this part up right there. Looking right where I'm pointing right there, it moves up to disengage. I'm pushing down on this lock, and it moves that part up. And this part has got a little tooth sticking down. Imagine the blade coming back. There's a little notch there, and that tooth goes down into that notch. push down, pulls it out so that the blade can start to close. And now you can start to close the blade. Again, stop. Make sure your hand's totally away from the path where the blade's going to go, and then finish closing it. So it's that straightforward. Over time, it'll start to get such a smooth motion. You'll see people closing things really quickly, and it's just going to become second nature to you. So this is the lock back or back lock. If it's in the middle, some people call it a mid lock. They're all the same basic technology. So those are very common knives. What if you got this kind of knife? This is a slip joint knife. This is a kind of knife that has no lock, but you still have to be careful when you're pushing on the spine to close it. Make sure you keep your fingers out of the way of the path where it's going to go. I treat every knife as if it's a slip joint knife. And that means when I'm using the knife, I don't hit the spine of the handle, the blade, I should say. I don't hit the spine of the blade, at least not on purpose. You don't want anything to push on the back of a blade, even if it's a lock back, even if it's a frame lock or liner lock. You don't want anything pushing on the back of the blade. The exception is fixed blade knives, when you might want to do something called batoning. That is, if you've got a piece of wood, think of this as the end of a log. It's a long stick this way. The end of the stick where you see the rings, some people put a knife on there, they take another stick and they whack on the spine of the blade to cut the wood. Don't do that with a folding knife. Unless your life depends on it and you just have to, don't do it with a folding knife. Use a fixed blade knife for that kind of job. Treat every knife as if it's a slip joint knife. Another very common type of knife is this. This is an axis lock. Benchmade developed this kind of lock, and it's very popular these days. It's no longer a copyrighted lock, so a lot of companies are using this kind of lock. This is a Sanrenmu knife, the 9201. Oh, I should have given the numbers. This is a Sanrenmu knife, also now known as SRM. They initially put them out as a Land brand, so you'll also see this as Land. This is the 9104. This is the 9105. You've also got the 9102 and the 9103, and they're just, steel colored instead of black colored. And they come in 3 different sizes. There's this size, there's this 7000 series size, this is the 7010, and they got a size in between these 2 sizes, the 8103, which I really like that in between size. So this is what we were talking about. I know I jump around every once in a while. Sorry about that. The axis lock is identified. If you look at the pivot and then you look down this side, there's nothing there. There's nothing to push over. There's nothing to change. But on the side, up and away from the pivot, there's this post sticking through. Now, there are some knives that have it up on the spine too now, but these posts, you have to push them back like that, like this. That gets pulled back. When it's back, it disengages so the blade can move. You can see right in that little spot, the blade's moving right there. When it's locked, it slides over and holds on to the tang of the blade. You usually use 2 fingers like this, and you pull them back. So you pull it back, and then you push on the spine, and then you stop pulling. Again, make sure your hands are clear on the path, and close it. Quite simple. This kind of lock can be a lot of fun, because you can just pull it back, and then do a wrist flick. It's hard to do on camera, especially in this small camera. Kind of cool, but I'm not teaching tricks right now. This is the axis lock, and it's many, many variants. So what if you have a more traditional knife? Let's say you've got a Victorinox, and there's the nail nick. You open the knife up, and you go, how do I lock it? There's nothing to be seen in here. There's nothing to push over. Some of them have weird things like this. You see the handle? Anything odd on the handle is to be investigated. It's grippy. On this one, you pull back on it, and then you can start to close the blade. Then you let go, make sure your hand's clear, and close. On this Victorinox multi-tool, let's take the blade out. The blade's out, and again, there's nothing to be seen except there's this little grippy spot right there. And you pull back on that grippy spot, push on the spine just a little ways, stay out of the way, and close it the rest of the way. Here's an OPINEL knife. It's got a lock. It's got this collar. A lot of people have OPINELs. They're quite common, actually. It's a collar lock, and you turn this whole collar. This whole piece can turn, and you turn it so it's available there. Then you can open the knife, and then you turn it again to lock the knife. So now the opening's here, and so now the spine of the blade, or the cutting edge of the blade, has metal in the way. It can't close. So you have to pull it back so that it's open there, and then push the knife closed, and then you lock it again so it stays closed. So that's another kind of thing that you're going to come across every once in a while. I'm going to go see if I've got some other kinds of locks that I want to show you. The three main styles of locking folders that are out there are the liner lock / frame lock. They work almost identically. Then you've got the back lock, or the lock back, or mid lock. They're all the same basic mechanism, the same style of thing, or versions thereof. And finally, what's very popular these days is the axis lock and versions of that. So if you learn those three main ones, look for variations on that. If you get a knife that just doesn't make sense, 99% chance it's a variation of one of those three types. So that's it. Thanks for watching my video. Thanks for liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. And remember, friends, always cut towards your chum. Old English word for friend. Cut towards your chum, not your thumb. Bye for now.